Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation with Brian Drury. So today we're going to be diving into a world that is a new world for the OCG community, and that is personal finance. So today my guest is Peter Bielagus, and he is a personal finance guru, a world-renowned speaker, and the author of 4 books on personal finance. So Peter's going to share his story today, and he's going to talk about how he started writing his first book at the age of 19 and how he was able to become a subject matter expert in a world he knew nothing about and hadn't actually studied before. You're also going to hear why being young was a benefit for him in publishing his first book. He's going to share his advice on how to get a world-class mentor, which is a huge question mark for many young adults in the world today. He's going to share his best advice for students on how they can get started mastering their finances today. And he's also going to talk for anyone who thinks that they picked the wrong major and is studying it right now, or anyone who graduated and thinks, man, I picked the wrong major in college. He's going to tell you how you can use that to your advantage, which I know for many people that's going to be extremely valuable. Now, something very interesting that he's also going to share is one way that you could actually make money while listening to this interview. That's not a misstatement or a lie or any other thing. It truly is something that if you use this resource that Peter talks about, you could make money during this show. Now, all I ask is that please don't do it while you're driving, guys. I want y'all to be safe while you're enjoying the Overcoming Graduation podcast. But one of the women that was at the seminar that I was at when Peter spoke found $1,000 of her money that she didn't know about that was just sitting there waiting for her. So could be going into your bank account or could be going to your next big dream vacation. So for anyone who's interested in writing a book, Peter's going to talk about what the new world of publishing looks like versus the old school way. And he's also going to talk about how to effectively sell a book. And then for anyone who's interested in speaking, he's going to talk about how he got into the world of professional speaking and how he went from getting $100 for his first paid speech to now making thousands of dollars per speech today. You're also going to hear about how he broke into the military world of speaking and how he's been flown all over the world by the military to speak to them about personal finances. And he has one story in particular that I think is going to blow you guys away. So Peter also was kind enough to share a link to give you guys some free giveaways and goodies, which I always love when my guests are willing to share that wonderful content with my audience. So if you go to PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com, you'll get a free ebook that tells you how the stock market works, and it's also going to explain what to buy and how to get started investing with less than $20 today. So that is going to be hugely valuable, and that's something that I know a lot of people are interested in, and it's kind of the fear of getting started, the fear of investing that first dollar, but you got to start somewhere, and why not start small and learn and then grow. So thank you guys all for watching today. I'm really excited to share this, and Peter gave a fantastic interview, and I learned so much during it, and I hope you guys do too. So it is my pleasure to introduce you all to Peter Bielagus. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation with Brian Drury. Today my guest is a man that goes by the name Peter Bielagus. And he has an extremely important message for our audience and really for everyone else who's going to be listening to this show. So Peter has been educating Americans about their personal finance for several years now. I believe it's over 7 years. And the way he does it is very unique and really kind of wonderful. I saw him give a presentation at a recent seminar I went to, and he gave insights that were able to help people in the audience get more money in their bank account immediately. I'm not talking like later during the day, like literally during his seminar, which was absolutely phenomenal and pretty amazing. So Peter travels the globe speaking to people. He's spoken in Japan, Korea, the Middle East, and Europe, and he has published multiple books, and the current book that is the primary focus is called Why Bother? How the Worst Pickup Line of My Life Changed My Financial Future and How It Can Change Yours. So Peter, I am so excited to have you on the show, and thank you for offering to do this today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm really excited to dig into your story because as you were talking at the seminar, I was just like, I gotta get this guy on the show because there's so many different things that are key to help young adults in getting out into the world and understanding how to properly manage their finances so that they can live their life, they can pursue their dreams, they can take the trips they want to without putting themselves in a financially uncomfortable position. So I think that is really great that we're going to be getting into that today. But as always, I'd like to start with your story. So like we discussed before the call, I'd like to start out with when you were coming out of college and what did you study? What were your feelings about the world? And we'll just kind of dig into that first piece there.
Sure. Well, I went to college at the University of Miami in sunny Florida, and I grew up in a small New Hampshire town and went to a small high school, and I just wanted to turn my world upside down by going to a big school in a big city. So I went there, and I always had the dream that I wanted to be a writer. And so I studied English and communication, and basically, said, I'm going to be a writer, that's what I'm going to do. And, and I'm sure some of your listeners are dealing with this, where, when you say something like a writer to a bunch of people, a lot of people will think, okay, so there are only two kinds of writers. There are the writers like Tom Clancy and Stephen King and J.K. Rowling, or there's the guy or girl who's broke, living in a studio apartment somewhere, trying to write their first novel.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, those were the reactions that I got from people. And it was very difficult to have the confidence to say, I'm going to stick with this, I'm going to do this, because it's one of those things where it doesn't work until it does work.
Right.
At least in sort of a financial sense. And, if you were to leave college and say, I'm going to be an accountant or an engineer, there's sort of an obvious starting place with some set compensation that, with any luck, will get slightly better every single year. Whereas, being something like a writer, it just, it's not going to work. It doesn't work until it actually does work. And so while I was in college, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff, everything from poems to screenplays to the start of a novel to nonfiction stuff. And there was just this one idea that kept coming up simply because people kept saying to me they wished a book like this existed. And what this idea was is that I was basically reading a lot of books on personal finance, because when I went to college, back in what I call the golden age of credit cards, colleges would let the credit card companies set up tables all over their student unions, and you'd walk by and they'd say, hey, sign up for this credit card and we'll give you a coupon for a free pizza. Well, as a college student, I was like, well, I just want a free pizza, I'll sign whatever you want.
Right.
And so very quickly I had a lot of credit cards, and I was in some pretty serious credit card debt. And so I started reading some books on personal finance about how to get out of debt. And I realized two things very, very quickly. One, I realized how much I did not know. And I realized how much potential a young person had if they paid attention to their financial life right away.
Right.
And then the third thing I started to realize, not from reading the books, but from talking with friends who would see all these finance books all over my dorm room, they would say, somebody should write a finance book for young people. Because a lot of the books I was reading were for an older person who had some money, who knew a little bit about finance. Maybe they had already bought their first house or bought their first car, or was at least earning an income from a job.
Right.
And my friends kept saying, somebody should write a book for young people on finance. And I kept saying, yeah, somebody should do that. That is a great idea. And then I said, well, wait a minute. Why don't I just write that book? If I want to be a writer, why don't I just write that book?
And Peter,
what's that?
Can I pause you there for 1 second? Because
Sure.
I think that's a really key insight, is for everyone listening, there is something in your life, or there is something that you think about all the time, that you talk about with your friends, that maybe has been a recurring idea in your life since you were a child, that you say, man, I would love to do blank, whether it's be a writer, try this, do that, create this. And exactly what Peter just said, you have that same capability to take whatever that is and start today. I'm not talking tomorrow or next week. I mean literally today. And even if it's just starting with a Google search to understand what the market looks like, if it's just starting to write the first line of your book, because even if the first line never actually makes it into the final book, you can start it today. So Peter, I just wanted to hit that because I love that mentality of, well, who better than me? Why not me? So, all right, so please continue.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. And I did start, and I started writing the book when I was 19 years sold. I didn't know anything about writing books. I didn't know how to sell books, how to publish a book. And the longest thing I had ever written, I had written screenplays and what have you, but the longest sort of book I had ever written was, was basically a term paper that was probably 20 pages. And here I set out to write this finance book that was going to be several hundred.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I started writing it, and I kept telling people, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. And basically, I graduated from college in 3 years, not because I'm smarter than anybody else, but because I was very worried about how much money I was spending to go to college, the cost of college, the student loans.
Yep.
And I graduated in 3 years, and that gave me this sort of weird year, if you will, where all of my friends were still in college, and I basically moved home for a year and only had to work part-time, and I was really able to sort of crank and get finished and finish my book and get it done in that year.
So it took you a year to write the book total, or like give or take?
It took me about 4 years.
4 years.
And a lot of that was research, because I was writing on something I really didn't know very much about at all. So a lot of that was doing research. But it took me about 4 years to write the book. And sort of finished it, started it when I was 19, wrote it all through my 3 years of college, finished it when I was, the year after, in 4 years down the road from there.
Okay, great.
And so basically, when I finished the book, I said, okay, well now I gotta sell this thing. And so I stopped reading books on personal finance, and I stopped writing my book, and I started to read everything I could on how to sell a book. How do you actually get published? And I found that a lot of writers, they sadly don't pay attention to that aspect of publishing.
Right.
They write a book in a closet, which is exactly what I did. But then when it's time to sell it, they just think their book is so brilliant, and they're so brilliant that somebody's just going to buy it, or a publisher's just going to jump through all these hoops.
Yeah.
And I realized the big irony in the publishing world is that no one has any time to read. So that was kind of an interesting thing. So, I was about to send publishers and literary agents my book, but I realized nobody wants my book. They wanted what's known as a book proposal, which is about a 30 to 40 page summary of my book. And basically I started sending that out, and I got 37 rejections, or I sent out 37 letters. I got 35 rejections, and 2 literary agents wanted to actually represent me, and I signed with one of them. And that happened in that year, that sort of that gap year, or that whatever year that I had graduated college and was living at home. And then basically I said, you know what, I really want to get some more experience actually working in the financial world. So I moved to Boston with a friend once he graduated, and basically started working in the financial world. And it took my agent about 2 years after I'd signed with him to actually sell the book. So, 4 years to write it, about 2 years to actually sell it, and then it took another year and a half for that book to actually be published on the shelves when you can actually, where you can actually buy the book.
Yeah.
It did take...
I was going to say, I think that another key piece of this story is when you're setting out to do anything, for the listeners, when it's, for example, writing a book, if you notice, Peter didn't get hung up by every single thing that he was going to need to do at some point in the future, because if he had sat there at the very beginning before he wrote his first sentence and he was starting to worry about sales and marketing and publishing and how do I do this and this, it was one of those things where he didn't need to worry about it at that moment in order to get the book written. So if you're going to start out, just chunk it down, focus on small steps. So the first chunk would be just writing the book. And then in chunking that down even more, write that first sentence, that first chapter, and let it build. Then when you get to the point where you've got a product or something close to completion, then you can move on to the next steps of working to find your publisher, working to learn more and spread your marketing. Because until you actually have a book to market, you can't really market. So, and to a point, I mean, you can have the copy and you can start throwing out samples and stuff, but you need to write it first before you can put it out to the world. So just wanted to hit on that quickly. So you said you got into the financial world and started working.
Correct. I started working in the financial world, and I just really worked in the financial world to get experience. I got my financial planning license. I worked preparing taxes. I worked in the real estate business and did some investment research and just sort of, kind of trying to get that experience in the financial world. And then again, the book was eventually sold, and that for me was sort of the game changer, if you will. And what was exciting is that it happened. Even though it took a very, very long time, it did happen at a young age. The book came out when I was 26 years old through a national publisher. And, a lot of people are like, wow, that's sort of a instant success, but they often forget that I started writing it when I was 19.
Right.
So, that's another, I think, reason to sort of get started now is because this stuff, it takes a while, whatever you're trying to do. Start your own business, get a master's degree, whatever it is, it takes time, and it's not going to be easier to do it tomorrow. Today is going to be the best day to take that first step.
And Peter, if I remember right, you when we spoke at the seminar, you said that age actually worked in your favor, that you being a younger guy worked in your favor for this book. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely did. If I were to publish that book now, it would not be as impressive because there's a lot of authors who have published from age 35 to 55. But when, this 24-year-old kid showed up writing a book on finance, of all things, it was not a book on how to survive college or making friends in high school or something. It was a book on finance, and they just really had not seen that before. And if I was a 65-year-old man who walked in with the exact same book, people would have been like, well, okay, that's but just the fact that I was 24, it does work. I did work to my advantage, and I think that's an important thing. A lot of times people think that their youth might be a disadvantage because they don't have the experience or whatever. But whatever disadvantages there may be, that there's going to be plenty of advantages, I think, to offset that.
Absolutely.
A lot of people will say to me, I'm 25, but I want to wait till I'm 35 to start a business, and that's okay. But then they say because I want to get the experience, or I want to do, learn more, save up more, whatever. And that's part of the argument, and I understand that. But another part of the argument is when you're 35, well, you might have a spouse or children or a house and a mortgage and all these other things. Whereas when you're 25, you're a little bit lighter in terms of what's involved with your life, and it may be an easier time when you're 25 rather than 35. So we just want to think about those kinds of things where it basically is there's two sides to every single coin. And in my case, this worked completely to my advantage, starting so early and publishing this book at an early age. And it also helped in my transition to become a financial speaker, because I started speaking in the college market, and I wasn't that much older than the students I was speaking to. Right. And there was sort of that unique connection where all the other financial presenters were much, much older, and, colleges and college students were like, well, that guy doesn't understand my life because he's 30 years older than me.
It's like hearing from your dad or your mom. It's like, oh,
exactly.
we get it. Yeah, I know I should save. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And it was, but when I showed up, it basically, students were like, okay, well, that guy can do it. He's not that much older than me. He's a couple years out of school. If he did it, I can do it.
Right.
And so yeah, that's again, I think that youth can be an advantage, and for whatever disadvantages there may be, I think there's plenty of advantages to offset that. And so basically, the book came out. I spent a year traveling to bookstores, speaking essentially for free, and slowly my advance ran out. And then I called my agent and I said, "You got to sell another book." And he's like, "Well, it took us 2 years to sell the first one. It's going to take some time." And then I asked him, "Well, how do most of your authors make money?" And he said, "Well, most of my nonfiction authors are professional speakers." And I attended a seminar kind of like the one that you were at, Brian, the one that you were just at, 10K Speaker, and to learn how to become a professional speaker. And I slowly started speaking for, I think the first paid speech I ever did, I got $100. And that was after a year of speaking for free. And then I eventually got $300 and then $500. And then slowly my fee went up and up and up.
I love that as well, because like with so many things, and we've touched on this a bit, is that, there's this fear or this idea of like, well, I want to be a professional speaker that gets paid. Like, for example, the conference that we were both at, I want to be a professional speaker that gets paid $10,000. And a lot of times we have that feeling, like I've had that feeling like, yeah, I just want to be put in front of a big audience and given a lot of money to do it. And then somebody said to me, but Brian, think about it. Any of these people who've gotten to that level, not just the financial level, but the exposure, the number of people they're speaking in front of, they've had to work for years to create that, and to also have the confidence in themselves that they can deliver a $10,000 speech or whatever it may be. So I think what you're doing is, or what your story really has, is so many different key messages. And the other thing was, you said, okay, I kind of reached this endpoint and said, okay, what next? What a lot of people would do at the end of that, okay, my advance has run out and I've done this for a while, I guess I gotta go back to doing something else, or like this is over. But what I loved about your story is you said, well, how do I continue to grow this? How do I evolve this into something new? And so it took it from just being a writer into being a speaker as well, which has grown throughout your entire life. So for the listeners, that's a key message. It's not that you need to be a writer and a speaker, it's that whatever it is that you're trying to do, if it reaches a point where you kind of feel like you've hit the upper wall or the upper limit, reach out to people who have done this in the past, people who have experience with this. Ask them questions to learn more about how you could grow and how you could modify or pivot so that you can continue to deliver value to your market and your audience. So you finished up with, you finished up the book, you spoke for a year for free, and then you started speaking more and more. And so was it just through this first book that you hit almost every state in the country, or was it a subsequent book that led to this?
The first book, no. I mean, it took, and I got one state left, but that's basically been a 10-year journey of speaking at colleges, corporations, military bases, and sort of all over the place. But but yeah, it's after that first book was sold, I got right into speaking, I got into speaking a year later, and then a couple years later, I sold my second book, which was a book called Quick Cash for Teens, which is a book on how to start a business as a teenager.
Right.
And so that book came out. That one did okay. It kind of, the issue with that book was I didn't have, I wasn't speaking in that market, the high school market, and that sort of as a speaker, you always want your book to be matching the market that you're actually talking to. And then my most recent book, the one that you just mentioned, called Why Bother? How the Worst Pickup Line of My Life Changed My Financial Future and How It Can Change Yours Too, that was my first entry into self-publishing.
Okay.
And when I published my first book over 10 years ago, that was the publishing. It was a different world. There wasn't a Kindle. Amazon was there, but it wasn't. It wasn't obviously anything near
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's just what changed publishing for me, or that's why I made the switch to a self-published book, because publishing is it's different now.
Yeah, and I'll say from my experience, like I just finished the final edit of my book, my first book, just this past weekend, actually.
Oh, great! Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and a lot of the things you had said reminded me of stuff that I've been through or things that I struggled with. And for me, it was one of those same situations where I said, all right, I want to be a writer. It's something I've always said, like you had said. And it took me just getting started writing the book, and then piece by piece, I found an editor, I found someone to proofread for me and work through it. And now we're at the final stage, going through that final edit and final proofread before publication. And I remember when we were trying to make that decision on how we're going to bring this to market, and the whole concept of going through a major publishing house and dealing with all of the different steps that it would take to accomplish that just seemed too complex. And I was like, and I feel like that's going to take a lot more time. I really want to just put this out to the world. And my dad said to me, he's like, Brian, he goes, it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, especially in your eyes, because you're going to be your own worst critic. He goes, but you got to get that first book out to the world if you want to be a writer. And I said, but Dad, what about all the new things I've learned since I started writing that I want to add in? He goes, save it for the next book.
Exactly.
So for me, the self-publishing, I mean, this is just kind of how the internet in general has been changing the world, but so many people that 10 years ago would never have had access to cheap publishing now can do it and put out an ebook, a real hard copy book, any type, and do it at very low expenses to no expenses. And just like, for example, guys, on Amazon, if you're using CreateSpace, you can use a make-to-order system where you don't have to invest money in, and all they do is pay you a smaller fraction because they're taking on more of the effort. So it's amazing how the dynamic has changed. And so when you came out with Why Bother, can you tell us a little bit about how different that felt, or what it looked like in comparison to that first book with the major publishing house?
It basically, that came about because I was speaking for Zappos.com, the shoe retailer, and they wanted to order 3,300 copies of my book.
Wow.
Which, at the time, I wasn't finished writing. And I think one of the most, like you were saying, one of the most exciting things about self-publishing is just the speed with which you can start and then have a finished product in your hands. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was literally, I had about half of it written, but literally in about 3 months, I went from having, half of a Word document to having a published physical book, not an ebook, in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that is probably, one of the exciting things. And then again, when a copy sells, it 100% of the money that the book earns is going right into my pocket.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that I haven't experienced yet, but I'm excited for. But
yes.
It's really for everybody out there, there's also this feeling that I loved what you talked about earlier in this interview, where you said that it's kind of this idea that I'll do it later, I'll do it when I'm older, or when I'm 35 is when I'll write my first book. And I had those same feelings because, but it wasn't for any kind of logical reason. It wasn't like, well, I want to do X, Y, and Z prior to that. It was because I just kind of had this story that I'd been telling myself, or that I'd been told, that I accepted, that, well, success like that comes later, and nobody my age writes books, so who am I to write one? And then if you actually look out into the world for examples, there are all kinds of amazing examples of young people, young adults doing amazing things in the world because they're not accepting that story. So in that same way, you chose not to say, oh, well, I'm just going to wait until I'm 50 to write my book, and then have gone on this amazing adventure. So what were some of the most exciting speaking engagements that came from this second book? Or technically third book, right?
Well, a lot of exciting engagements have come from all three books.
Okay.
Some of them recently, last year in 2014, I gave the largest speech I've ever given, it was to 3,500 students at Kent State University in Ohio.
Wow.
And that was just really exciting. A little secret of speaking is that the larger the crowd, the easier the speech.
Really?
A lot of people think it's different, but the larger the crowd, the easier the speech.
And why is that? Is that just because you're not looking at individual faces as much, or like what causes that?
It's a number of things. Larger crowds are more energy, just natural energy is in the room. And if you tell a joke to a crowd of 20 people and 10% of the audience laughs, that means 2 people are laughing.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell a joke to an audience of 3,500 people and 10% laugh, that means 350 people are laughing, and that's loud.
Mm-hmm.
And that means other people are going to laugh just because people are already laughing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier in that sense of the word. But yeah, I've always found, and it may just be me, but I've always found that it is easier to speak to a larger audience than a smaller one.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an exciting speech. I've also had some very exciting speeches for the military. They've flown me all over the world, and I've spoken on military bases. I've spoken in airplane hangars,
mm-hmm.
And the crowning achievement there was I spoke on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Indian Ocean, where the Navy flew me out on a 5-hour flight, and we landed on the aircraft carrier, and I was able to speak on that aircraft carrier. And what's just kind of exciting about that is even people who have been in the Navy for 20 years, they typically don't get on and off of an aircraft carrier by flying. They typically get on and off by walking.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I remember you sharing a bit of this story. Can you tell the audience how you got off the aircraft carrier? Because that seemed just unbelievable.
Yeah, it basically, the aircraft carrier has obviously a runway, but the runway is not long enough for a normal plane or for even a special plane. And so they use a device called the catapult to literally throw the plane off, to allow the plane to accelerate very, very quickly. And we hopped into the plane that we were in, and we strapped in, and they load the plane into this device called the catapult. And then they literally shot us off the deck of the aircraft carrier. We went from 0 to 175 miles an hour in just 3 seconds. And so it really is kind of an exciting, it literally is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I was very excited that the Navy put the emphasis that they do on personal finance education and got out there to bring a financial presentation to the service members that were serving on that ship.
Mm-hmm. And what I love about that, one, just the fact that you got launched off of an aircraft carrier and got to 175 miles an hour. But another component that I really love about that story is, let me ask you, when you were 19 years old and you started writing the first sentence for your first book, did you ever think it would take you on a journey around the world that had you getting launched off aircraft carriers?
Honestly, it did not. And, honestly, I never thought my first book would be on personal finance. I never thought, and it's pretty exciting where this career can take you, and I think where any career can take you if you're open to the idea and sort of asking that question. But I was at a convention, a seminar like the one that you and I were at, Brian, on how to be a speaker. That's something I invest in. Even till today, I invest in seminars and coaches to help me with my business.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I was at one of those, and it was for speakers, and there was a speaker there who spoke to the military, and then there was another woman there who was in the military. She was a Marine. And I basically started asking them, well, how do I speak to the military? How do I do this?
Mm.
And, it's one of those things like we talked about before is find someone who is doing what you want to do and just ask them how they got there. How, who do you call at a military base, or who do you call to do whatever it is you're trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
And these two people sort of broke it down for me, and that's eventually how I broke into the military and started speaking
Mm-hmm. And that's a really key point that I'd like to dig into as well, is the importance of good quality coaches, mentors. And a lot of times what kids my age will say, and what I've even said is, well, how do I get in touch with these people? How do I even begin to start? Because, we look at people like Sean Stevenson, like you, and we're like, how could I ever get in touch with this person? Because there's that feeling if I send an email to their email address saying, hey, I'd love to learn from you. Well, one, it's like you're not providing any value to that person, it feels like. But two, it's like, oh, that'll just go into their junk mail file. So can you talk a bit to the listeners on what you have found to be the most effective ways to find mentors, create value for them, and then grow that relationship?
Yeah, I think a couple things. The first is, there's a chance, depending on who you email, that it will just go into their spam folder, or there'll be an auto response, or an assistant will respond. There's a chance of that happening, but number one, I would say, why not just give it a try? Send them a quick email, and ask them, I'd love to learn something from you. What do you recommend is a good first step? And, they might say something like, buy my book, or, come to my seminar, and that's okay. A lot of times I think the problem is when we approach people, let's say I want Donald Trump to write the opening of my next book.
Mm-hmm.
When I contact Donald Trump with the idea of, hey, will you write the opening of my next book? What I'm essentially doing is I am being selfish. I'm saying, hey, Donald Trump, give me something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying, hey, Donald Trump, what could I do for you? Now, you might think, okay, well, what could I possibly give Donald Trump that he needs? And honestly, I don't know, but that might be volunteering at one of his charity events, or that might be buying a copy of his book and just writing him a letter saying, I really, really like this. I wrote a testimonial for you on Amazon, or whatever. Just giving them some value first before it's, hey, Donald Trump, give me something.
Right.
So I think that, number one, it doesn't hurt to contact them via email. And number two, when you contact them, think about how to give them some value, even if it's just a small amount, even if it's just, hey, I bought your book, I read it, I really like it, and I'd love to chat with you someday. Or I noticed you have a seminar, and the seminar is $5,000, and I really can't afford that. But if you need a volunteer, I'm happy to come and work my butt off for 3 days during your seminar, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kind of things. Or think about where they might be. I met Robert Kiyosaki, the guy who wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm.
I met him at a big convention called Book Expo, which is a huge convention for the publishing industry, and it's usually held in New York City. And I met him. I was just walking through the convention hall, and I saw him, and I was like, wait a minute, that's Robert Kiyosaki. And I just went up to him, and again, I started by giving him some value. I said, hey, I've read pretty much all of your books, really, really enjoyed them, and then I just started chatting with him.
Mm-hmm.
And, it never hurts to ask, and I think the best approach is start by giving them some value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so critical because, as a young adult, you see all these people that you want to reach out to and you want to connect with, but you're not even sure where to begin. And that's one of the most consistent pieces of advice I've heard is provide value to them first. Because people like you and like any of those mentors out in the world are so used to people coming up and saying, hey, could you tell me how to fix this? How do I do that? And immediately, for all the listeners, think about any time someone just comes to you expecting something from you without any word or thought or anticipation of you getting something in return. And it's not always about giving to get, but when somebody just comes like, hey, give, it can immediately kind of put up some walls and back you up. Whereas if somebody said, hey, I saw your book, I really love this chapter, it helped me change my personal finances tremendously, all of a sudden that person is willing to listen because you've shown that you've invested either time or money in them. And honestly, Peter, it's like if I hadn't started to invest in these mentors and coaches and people that I believe in, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And all that began about 2 years ago. I picked up the phone and called Sean Stevenson, thinking I was going to get a secretary or some, just some person somewhere down the line from him. And he picked up the phone, and I was I was like, oh my God, is this really Sean? And then through that, what's that?
You're right, absolutely.
And through that, I ended up going to one of his seminars, and through that seminar, I met my coach, and through my coach, I met you, and then you happened to be going to this seminar that I went to, and we were actually able to meet in person. So for you guys out there, I mean, one, it's take a shot. Send out the email, make the call, but take the time to show that you've learned enough about this person or you've invested time into their material to allow them to kind of bring down the walls and say, okay, this person has invested in me. What are they looking for? So awesome. I love that, Peter. Now, I would love to really start to dive into, and actually before we get off your story, because I love your story, man, and I love the journey it's taken you on. What are one or two of your top countries or favorite countries that you visited around the world, and why?
I really liked Japan quite a bit because even though it's a first world country, it is completely different. If you buy a soda out of a vending machine in Japan, it is a totally different experience than buying a soda out of a vending machine in the United States.
Really?
And, you think, what could be different about that? But it's just completely different. The vending machines will talk to you, and just so it was sort of like, okay, I'm in a first world country. What surprises am I really going to run into?
Mm-hmm.
But sure enough, it just was, everything was a different experience. Using the restroom, traveling on the subway, just totally different. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I also, even though this wasn't as a result of a military speech, but I really enjoyed traveling to Africa. That was just a natural wonder. A beautiful spot, and it was an incredible journey. I've been there twice and can't wait to go back.
And where did you go in Africa?
I went to Nairobi or Kenya. I went to Tanzania. I went to Zanzibar, and then on my second trip, I went to South Africa and Zambia.
It's amazing. And actually, my mom went to high school for 2 years in Nairobi. So so Kenya, I have not yet visited Africa. I've been fortunate to do a lot of traveling so far in my life, but it's definitely on the list to get out there at some point. I've heard amazing things as well. I remember my mom just talking about the safaris and things that she went on. So that's definitely on the list.
Very cool.
So, okay, so now what I would love to get into, because we've got about 20 minutes left in our interview, is really diving into finance and the personal finance for the young adult, because I remember exactly what you talked about is coming onto campus at Penn State and the first day of classes, and there's all these booths set up, and there's free t-shirts and a free pizza, and you can get a football, and it's like, all you have to do is sign this paper and get a card, and it's like, it's pretty enticing, but I remember my parents had said to me, do not do it. So I was just kind of like, oh, okay, I had some preface, but I also knew a bunch of people that signed up with fake names and put fake information just to get the stuff. But for the young adults, there's so many things that I'm uncomfortable with. I feel like money can become a very uncomfortable conversation very quickly for not just young adults, but people of all ages, because I feel like what makes us the most uncomfortable are the things that we feel we understand the least. So can you talk a bit to some of the key challenges that young adults face, and maybe a couple of the recommendations you make for kids just coming out of college or maybe even kids still in college on how to best manage their finances?
Yeah, I would basically say, first of all, if you are still in school, and if you are borrowing money to go through school, and I was one of those people, the first thing you want to do is you want to go to the financial aid office like today and ask them, as of right now, what is the amount of my monthly student loan payment? And I've spoken to close to 100,000 college students. I've met literally two, that could answer that question.
Wow.
And some students know how much they've borrowed, 10,000, 20,000, whatever. Very, very few know what that means in terms of a monthly payment. And most people we pay off our student loans monthly. We're not going to write a $20,000 check. We're going to pay $200 a month or $100 a month or whatever it is. And sadly, very few students are able to tell you how much their student loan monthly payments are. So that's a very important thing to ask right away to the financial aid office. And that will help determine, that one question or that one number will help determine a lot of things in your life. You know, if your student loan payment is $300 a month, maybe you're not going to live at this apartment that the person whose payment was $200 a month could live at.
Right.
So, you know, a lot of times, sadly, students graduate, and when they graduate, they accept a job at a certain salary, they get an apartment, they get a car, they get HBO, they buy some furniture, and then the student loan payment arrives.
Right.
And they're like, oh, wait a minute, I just committed to all of these things, and now I've got to find an extra $350 a month for my student loan.
Mm-hmm.
So know what that number is, and literally every semester, go and ask the financial aid office, okay, now what is it? Okay, now what is it? And, you know, just making sure that it's updated and you know what that number is every single semester or every single year.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the first. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, you know, a lot of students, they say to me, well, Peter, I don't have a job yet, so I can't really save any money. But when I get a job, you know, that's when I'm going to save money. And, you know, that sounds like a great line of thinking. It just sadly does not work. The best time to save money is literally right now.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't have a job, even if you're like, well, my parents are sort of supporting me and I have some money from student loans, just get into the habit of putting some of it aside on a regular basis, even if that's literally $1 a month. One thing that I try to stress to college students and recent college graduates is that, and kind of like what we were talking about with writing the book, is don't get hung up on the amount. Don't say, oh, you know what, I can't save $100 a month. Don't worry about the amount. Save $1 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can save $1 a month, very soon you can save $2 a month, and then $5 a month, and then $25, and then you can build it up to $100 or whatever. But don't get, you know, so many times people pick a number, and then they say, well, I can't save that number, and then they just don't even start. Don't get hung up on the number. Just get started.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a critical piece, and that's actually something that I've been doing, is procrastinating with investing. My brother is a financial advisor, and he's been encouraging me. He's like, Brian, start as early as you can, because when I graduated, I had $80,000 in student loans. So,
okay,
as you said, like, I was fortunate, and I was able to defer the payments until after I started, and I believe I had 6 months after I started, or 3 months. There was some kind of grace period, and then I got my first payment, which my minimum was back then, I think it was close to, or a little over $900 a month. And like you said, that was a little bit of a slap in the face, because I knew, and I promised my parents I would find a way to pay, that if I went to this school, if I went to Penn State, then I would find a way to pay this off, and I would take care of it. And I did get a good job coming out of school. I had a good salary. But exactly to your point, I moved out to my new apartment. I moved out to Wisconsin. I got started, and I started living off my money in a way. I'm like, okay, this is how much I have for free money. This is how much I have for savings. And then as soon as that first payment came, I was like, holy crap, I barely have anything, you know, in terms of play money each month. And wow, how am I going to save? How am I going to go on trips? And if I had known that, if I'd taken the time to figure out what that number would be earlier, I would have been able to better prepare and understand, okay, maybe I should be saving this now, maybe I should be investing this here. But I think that point that you said is just absolutely critical, that don't worry about, because I think it's the paralysis through analysis things, where people say, once I know everything about X, whether it's starting a business, investing, saving money, then I'll get started. But that's just another way to procrastinate, and that's something I do all the time. So, okay, so please continue, because I'm loving the financial advice. I'm like taking notes in my head.
Sure. Well, so I think that's, you know, the habit is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And never get caught up in the amount, like I can't save a huge amount of money, or like let's say you have credit card debt, okay, and let's just say the minimum payment on those credit cards is $100 a month, and you literally can't afford to pay any more. You're just paying the minimum. You're just getting by. Well, what I tell people is, you know what? If that's the situation, try to pay $105 a month. That's it. Just get into the habit of my next credit card payment, I'm going to send in $105, and then the next month I'm going to send in $110. Not getting involved or trying to figure out, how do I send $500 in to pay off my credit card? If you can do that, that's wonderful. But if you can't, just make those tiny, tiny steps, and it'll very, very quickly build into something exciting. Mm-hmm. So make sure, create those good habits without getting wrapped up in the amount. I think two other great things for people to do is go to either creditkarma.com, the word credit, and then the word karma, KARMA.com, creditkarma.com, or annualcreditreport.com, and check your credit score. See what it looks like, because that is going to be an important thing for especially recent graduates. A lot of employers are checking your credit report and your credit score to determine whether or not they want to give you a job. And a lot of people don't. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Why is, well, there's a few reasons for it. One reason is simply that if you're working in, let's just say, the financial world, they want to make sure you have a good credit score, because if you're handling money, they don't want you to accidentally reach into that bank account and take you some for yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you have a lousy credit score or a whole bunch of debt, they might be, you might be tempted to do that. And the other interesting thing with credit scores is they've run these scenarios where they've basically said, or they've run these scenarios and they've compared people with good credit scores tend to are less likely to steal money from their employer. They are less likely to change jobs unexpectedly. They're less likely to do a whole bunch of things that employers would like to see their employees would like to see in their employees. So they're starting to check these credit scores, and so it's important to visit again either creditkarma.com or annualcreditreport.com and just make sure that credit score and credit report look correct.
See, and that's interesting too, because for me, when I looked at my credit score and when I started to learn a little bit more about that, which was out of college. In college, I was like, oh, who cares? Doesn't matter. I was like, oh yeah, that'll be important later in life if I'm looking to take out a loan or, get a loan for a car or whatever. And it's actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I had no idea that was factored into an employment decision. Because, if you tell people, all right, 10 years down the road when you buy a house, especially like in college, it's like, all right, that's 10 years from now, it's forever. That's it's basically half my life added on, because all right, I'm 20, so when I'm 30, great. But when you say, all right, that could affect your first job coming out of college, that's a great incentive to get educated on that and incorporate that into your decision making. And also you can see that and say, okay, how can I start making better financial decisions to improve this score as well? Because many of those sites will tell you what things are affecting your score negatively, so you can make adjustments. So that is awesome.
Exactly. And it's also people think, well, I'll need that when I go to buy a house or whatever. You're also going to need it to rent an apartment. You will, if you have a good credit score and you want to, let's say, hook up electricity to that apartment or get cable TV, if you have a good credit score, they will often waive the deposit, the security deposit for all those things. Whereas if you have a lousy credit score, they're going to say, okay, give us $100 security deposit for this, and another $100 security deposit for that, and sort of getting started right out of school or whatever, you're going to be laying down some serious money in security deposits. Mm-hmm. You can get around that if you have a great credit score.
Yeah, that was something that I was fortunate that helped me. And again, I had no idea, because you're talking to AT&T and they're like, what's your credit score? And I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, what's a good range? And then talking with them, it's like, oh, well, we're able to offer you a discount. And like you said, I had no idea, but I was like, oh, I just saved some money that I otherwise would have had to put in X amount or for all the different services. When you lump it all together, it turns into something big. Now, Peter, I'd be curious to hear from you because I have done some reading with some other individuals who talk about personal finance. What I'd be curious to know is what is your personal philosophy on saving? Because there are some people that say, cut everything out, like live on the bare minimum, save as much as you can. There are others that say save aggressively, but also spend aggressively on the things you want and invest in growing yourself. So what is your personal philosophy in terms of how to most effectively save money?
Well, for me, I would say, again, start with saving something.
Mm-hmm.
Don't, especially for the students that are, it's called students that don't have a regular income, and they're like, well, what am I, I don't have any money.
Right.
Always save something. Even if it's a penny a day or whatever. It's just that the habit is the most important thing to me. And then, the thing is that I think for me, we save for really only two reasons. Reason number one is to pay for an emergency, so a flat tire or whatever. And the second thing is we save for a goal. And, every financial advisor will tell you a goal that is forced on you is retirement. There's one day that's going to come when you will physically no longer be able to work, whatever your job is. And so you will be forced into not working for an income anymore. And then there's also a day when you don't have to work anymore because you've saved enough money. And it's up to you on how far apart those days actually are. If you, for many people, sadly, they're the same day where they, or they're not even the same day because they're forced to stop working, but they still haven't saved enough money. So I think that the most important thing when it comes to saving is, number one, is to just start. And then number two, sit down and write some of those goals. One of those goals is retirement, and the rule of thumb for retirement for anybody is to save 10% of your income, whatever it is. So if you make $30,000 a year, that means saving $3,000 a year for retirement. If you make $300,000 a year, that means saving $30,000 a year. And then just write down what your other goals are. My trip to Africa, both of them were goals, and those were goals that I saved up for. And the interesting thing is that I enjoyed that trip more because I saved up for it. And it was something where, slowly I had a little bit more money, and I was almost ready to go on the trip. And then I had a little bit more money, and I was almost ready to go on the trip. And I had a little bit more money. And that sort of saving up for something can be fun and exciting, and you appreciate that much more rather than saying, I'm just going to go, right now.
Right.
And so I think most important thing is going to be just get started, even if you have no income, even if you think you're totally broke, save something. And the second thing is write down some goals, one of which is going to be retirement, and then whatever else you're trying to do. Buy a house, start a business, take a year off, go to grad school, whatever that may be. Take some time to write down some goals, and sort of just back it, reverse engineer it. If your trip to Europe is $5,000 and you want to take it in 2 years, well, how much do you need to save to get to that trip? Is that $200 a month or $100 a month or $500 a month? Sort of just back into whatever those goals may be.
Yeah, I love that message because for one, I think we're very quick to kind of crush our dreams when we assume it's going to be way too expensive. And rather than do exactly what you said and chunk it down and say, all right, how much per month? Because if let's say it's $20 a week, it's like, all right, guys, that's one less, Domino's pizza and a side, or that's, a couple less drinks at the bar one weekend. And then in X amount of months, you'll be able to go to Europe, to Asia, to somewhere across the U.S. you've never been. And for all the listeners, in terms of travel, also, building on what Peter said, define not only where you want to go, but what type of trip you want to have. Because some people might have heard that $5,000 number for a trip to Europe and been like, oh my God, that's I'll never be able to do that. But that would be a super luxury trip. I mean, it all depends on your time frame. If you stay in hostels, you can stay in nice hostels for $10 to $20 a night. You can get food for like $3 a meal. So defining what type of trip you want. Do you want the luxury and the relaxation? Do you want to go backpacking? Are you camping? Defining all that will help you. And then again, to Peter's point, that's something I've noticed, because I'll be honest, Peter, there have been times you hear about, let's say, like LeBron or someone, and how much money they make, and you get angry. You're like, what? You're like, he spent more at the club in Miami than my $80,000 in loans. Like, I was like, why can't he just give me that, and then I'll be able to do all the things I want? But to your point, I'm not, full disclosure, I would love to have these loans gone, but having them and having to live with them and work with them and find ways to pay them more quickly, more effectively, to learn about reconsolidating and refinancing, it's helped me to grow as a person and learn a lot more than I would have had someone just freely given me this gift. So for everyone listening, I know there's that tendency to be like, well, how do they make so much? Well, one, they worked for it and they're creating value for people and they're getting returns for that. So if you want to be compensated better, find a way to create more value. It's always a give and take scenario. So Peter, at the seminar, I foreshadowed this a little bit earlier, that you gave the audience a way to find out if they had money that they could get during the seminar. So would you be willing to share that little trick or tip with the audience today?
Sure, and I'll sort of give you the quick backstory to exactly how this works. Let's say, I mentioned that if you get your first apartment and you hook up cable TV, if you have a good credit score, they will often waive the security deposit. But let's say they don't waive it, and let's say they say, okay, send us $50, and then we'll hook up cable, and we'll hold that $50 just in case you don't pay on time.
Mm-hmm.
And so they hold that, and then you get cable, and that's wonderful, and then eventually you move out of that apartment and you move to a different place. Well, the cable company has that security deposit and they owe it to you. They are not allowed to keep that money. But let's say for whatever reason they send it to your forwarding address, it comes back, they can't find you. What do they do with that money? They are legally not allowed to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
So what they can do with it is they can give the money to a little known place called the Unclaimed Funds Office in the state that they are working in. Every state in the nation has its own Treasury Department. So we have a federal Treasury Department and we have state Treasury Departments. And then within those state Treasury Departments, there's a little known place called the Unclaimed Funds Office, which is where all the missing money in that state is gathered. So if I'm the cable company and I can't find Brian, he has a $50 security deposit. I sent it to him, and it came back, but I'm not allowed to keep the money. I will give it to the Unclaimed Funds Office, and I will say, this belongs to Brian, and it's not mine, and I'm giving it to you, state government, and it's no longer my problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, that's where all the missing money in every state gathers. And currently, and this is baffling, in the United States, there's about $32 billion sitting in these accounts, just literally sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just keeps collecting because people are always, moving and leaving a security deposit or not collecting a tax refund. I used to work for H&R Block, and I was shocked that, there were so many people who wouldn't collect their refunds.
Wow.
And, we would have them in the office, and, H&R Block has a way to pay for your tax return out of your refund, your preparation.
Yeah.
You can subtract it from your refund, and when you do that, the check is not sent to you, it's sent to the office. And I remember the secretary in the office, she would literally spend the month of May just calling people, hey, Mr. Jones, you have $600 here. This is H&R Block. Hey. And literally, she would have to chase these people for this money. And then eventually, what we would have to do with those checks, because again, they're not legally ours, we would have to give those to the Unclaimed Funds Office in the state at the time that was in Massachusetts. So that's, there's tons and tons of money, and it's always being put into these accounts. And so the question that I think a lot of listeners might be wondering is, well, how do I know if I have any money? And paper for years. They would just publish names and names and names. Peter, you're owed $50. Brian, you're owed $100, whatever. And then finally, the Association of, or the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators, those are the people who work in these offices, they finally got together and they created a national website that you can basically go and look at any state that you have ever lived in to find out whether or not you have any money in your name. And that website is unclaimed.org, the word unclaimed.org. And I do want to stress that that is not unclaimed.com and it's not unclaimed.net. Those websites will charge you. Unclaimed.org is free. Mm-hmm. And you can basically go and just type in your name and any state that you have ever lived in and see if you have any money. And this is a great thing for your listeners to do because, you know, they're making that transition from college to, somewhere. And so they probably had an apartment or a dorm and had a security deposit put down or maybe had a bank account that they opened in their college town, but now they're in a new town, they open a new account. But there may still be some money in that old account. And so, these are just things that that we want to check on, and we just want to make it a habit to look once a year on this website, unclaimed.org.
See, and I love that and so for the listeners, I literally checked it while Peter was giving the description. So it took a matter of 30 seconds. Unfortunately, I do not have any fortunes waiting for me, but at the same time, maybe I've been good about collecting things back. But I will say from the seminar, during Peter's speech, several people did that same thing, and at the end he said, did anyone check? The guy next to me had about $1.62 that he was owed, another person about $19, and then one woman in the audience had over $1,000 sitting in the unclaimed fund that was for her. I mean, that was her money just sitting out there in this, would you say it was $32 billion?
Exactly. It's a staggering amount of money.
God. So $32 billion of people's money is just sitting in this big old bank account waiting for them to come claim it. So definitely check that out for yourselves because you could be the person that has $1,000 sitting out there and just think, one, that could go to that trip that you're planning. Two, that could help out with something. So it takes so little time but could make a huge difference for you. Or it could just be a fun little $20 that you use on something. So, for everybody listening, I know you can already tell from this interview that Peter has a wide range of knowledge about multiple different financial topics and areas that could deeply impact your life. And he was kind enough to make an offer to give you guys some free stuff so that you can continue to grow and really get started in this financial adventure. So, Peter, would you please share with the audience the great stuff that you're going to be offering them?
Yeah, if the audience can... They can find my website by just going to, the easiest one to remember is gettingloaded.com. They can learn all about me at gettingloaded.com. Or they can, if you'd like, I'd like to offer something, again, giving value. I'd like to offer something for free to all of your audience members. If they go to the website PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com, so my name, Peter, but without the R, P-E-T-E, and then PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com, then I will send them what I send to a lot of the college audiences that I speak to, which is just a 10-page ebook on the stock market and how it works. And, a lot of your listeners probably are hoping to get invested and started in the stock market. This is sort of a quick, easy, simple way to get started on that and focus on that. And if they just go to PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com, they can find out all about that.
It's funny because you're saying the listeners while I'm sitting here going, oh man, I got to get on there and get that book because that's been something I've been talking about since I graduated is getting started on, and like so many things, I procrastinated. So thank you so much, Peter. That's amazing. So guys, visiting Pete, that's P-E-T-E, sendmefreestuff.com, you will get a free ebook created by Peter Bielagus to help you start getting invested and learn about the stock market, which is something I will be checking out probably as soon as we're done with this interview. So,
very cool.
So thank you so much, Peter. I mean, I appreciate you giving value. You've given so much value today to me and to the audience. So This is really amazing stuff, and it's been great getting to know you and to meet you, but I think we're at our time to close out, which I think I could pick your brain for hours, but I'm sure you probably have other things to do today. So, so the way I always close out these interviews is with the same question. And I like to ask the interviewees on my show, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the point when you were graduating college or at that younger age, knowing everything you know now. And by the way, Peter, how old are you now?
I'm now 38.
38, okay. If you could go back and talk to your college graduation self, knowing everything you know now at 38, what would be the most important message you would share?
I would say, that's a good question. I would say, number one, believe in yourself, but support those beliefs by talking to people who have done what it is you're trying to do. So, whatever that is, I want to start my own charity, I want to be a Navy SEAL, I want to, whatever that is, talk to those people. Because a lot of times, I think we have a belief, and the first part is just believing in ourselves. Like, I want to open my own restaurant. So I got to believe in myself. That's the first obstacle. But oftentimes the second obstacle is we don't actually know what it's like to open a restaurant. We like eating in restaurants and we like going to restaurants, but we don't know what it's like to own one. Mm-hmm. Or, you're in school right now, you love being in school, you say, I want to go all the way and I want to get my PhD. But maybe getting your PhD is completely different than getting your undergraduate degree. Mm-hmm. So talk to the people who are doing what it is you want to do and get the facts. As a writer, I went to go see a famous writer at a book signing, and like 500 people showed up to his book signing. At my book signings, I only have 12 people. So it's just, you want to just be sure exactly what it is that you're trying to attempt. Whatever it is you're trying to attempt, what is it really like? Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to, be aware of.
That's fantastic. And I think that message goes for everyone, but if you think of it in a college context, there's the kids who are trying to pick their major, and they think they know what being in a marketing major, an accounting major is like, but then talking to someone who's done it, who's been there, they can get a much more realistic picture to see if that fits with them. Now, for all the listeners, if you picked a major and it turned out not to be right for you, that is totally fine. As Peter did in his life, there's always a way to modify, change. And actually, Peter, do you have any advice on that for the listeners? So say somebody graduates and they're like, dude, I totally messed up. I picked the wrong thing. I hate X major. This is not the thing for me. What do I do next? What advice would you give to those individuals?
I would say that, if your major is just one aspect of it. And, I write books on finance, I speak on finance, but I was not a finance major. Mm-hmm. And, so I would try to reverse it or try to look at it like, okay, not how does my major limit me, but what can I use this major for? Mm-hmm. So let's just pretend you want to work at XYZ company, and XYZ company says, we only hire people who have this major, which it would be very rare that you would hear that, but, ask them the question like, well, okay, here is what I majored in. I didn't major in what you guys want, but this is what I did major in. What could I do here? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, you can't start in the division that you want, but you could work in this other division. And then you could take some online courses and eventually move over here. So ask that question. My major was not finance. I write and speak on finance right now, but what was my major? Well, it was on communications major, and I was also an English major. Mm-hmm. So I know how to communicate and I know how to write. And so the fact that I used that for finance didn't require me to get a finance degree. All it required is what could I use my major for. And, the people that have already graduated ask that question, what could I use my major for? And, a lot of times people will maybe you can get an employer to pay for that. Maybe that's the answer, but asking, what could I use my major for? Or again, who is doing what I'm trying to do? Find that person and ask them how they did it. You know, hey, you got a job here and you don't have an accounting major. How did you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, or you're a CPA, but you never studied accounting in college. How the heck did that possibly work? You know, asking those kinds of questions. You know, is there a certificate I can get, or an intensive, you know, 2-day course? And, you know, a friend of mine, he majored in business, which you think, okay, that's a pretty stable, solid major to get a job. And he got a job that was just okay right out of school.
Mm-hmm.
And literally within 6 months, he was like, you know what? I spent 4 years doing the wrong thing. I enjoyed college. I had fun, and I learned a lot. But I spent 4 years doing the wrong thing. And he took an intensive computer programming class, and very quickly doubled his salary by becoming a computer programmer.
Wow.
And the interesting thing about him, and again, asking that question, well, what could I do with my major? Is he worked as a computer programmer for years, but now he manages the entire computer programming division at his company.
Wow.
And that management training he got from his degree.
Oh,
So
I love that.
you might not need your major right now, today, with the job that you are trying to get, but it's not a waste. It's not like I did the wrong thing. I wasted this money. I wouldn't look at it like that. And I think if you give it the time that it might need, you'll understand, or you'll see, just like my friend did, where, you know, yeah, he doubled his salary as a computer programmer. That's wonderful. But then years later, when they were looking to promote somebody, they were like, well, all these people are computer programmers, but none of them have management experience. And then my friend was like, well, actually, I do. And so he rose above those other individuals. So don't think of it as a waste. Don't think of it as like there's nothing I can do with this. You know, my friend majored in political science, and now he works for Bain Capital. And so, you know, it's not necessarily like, what was your major? I want to know exactly what it was. What was your GPA? It's got to be above this number. You're really not going to see that as much as we think we do. So I would say learn as much as you can from the people that are, again, doing what you're doing or have the major you're considering. Ask them. And not just the seniors at your college, but the people who graduated 5 years ago. You know, you majored in accounting. What's it like now? Ask those questions, and that is probably one of the best pieces of advice that I could give to my younger self, is find the people that are doing it, whatever it is you're trying to do, and ask them how they did it.
I love that. And for the listeners, keep in mind that transcends just getting a job or finding the right job or career. I've done this plenty of times, and what I've seen happen a lot, and I've heard this advice before, but it is so critical, because it's I think the way you delivered it is different than I've ever heard it, which I think is really key. And I love when you get a similar message in a different way, and it helps you to rethink it. And so as I'm thinking through this, you talk to people sometimes about wanting a better relationship, or how to find, you know, a good girlfriend, or how to take a great trip. It's like, if you think about any of these things, so often we ask the people closest to us, maybe in our office, maybe our group of friends, our family, and if they've never done that, they may not be so inclined to be supportive. They may be like, well, I don't even know if that's possible. Whereas if you ask someone who has done it, who has been there, who's gone through the struggles, they can go, oh yeah, it's really not as hard as you think, or actually, yeah, this is very challenging, but if you're willing to put in the work, it's hugely rewarding and gratifying. So keep that in mind when you're asking. I heard somebody say once, I would never ask my parents for advice, for dating or relationship advice, because they've each been divorced 3 times. And it's like, so if I want a healthy, stable marriage, I'm going to ask the couple that's been together for 36 years and ask them about how they did it and what they did to grow together. So keep that in mind, guys, because it can apply to any aspect of your life. So Peter, thank you so much, man. This has been awesome. I really appreciate everything you're doing, and this has been a really fun interview.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck with your show, and I hope to hear from your viewers on PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com.
And Peter, before we have you go, are there any other resources where the listeners can come to find out more about you? You said gettingloaded.com. We have PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com. Are there any other areas that the listeners could come to find out more about you?
If you just go to gettingloaded.com, that's my website. They can learn all about me there, and they can email me there. All my information's on there as well.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, Peter, thank you so much again. For the listeners, as always, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on Stitcher by searching for Overcoming Graduation. You can visit the overcominggraduation.com blog to sign up for the email list, where you'll be able to find out about upcoming offers, any events that we have going on, and also just learn more about the most recent interviews that we've had. And on that website as well, you can see a full list of every interview ever done, some of the videos I've recorded on my YouTube channel, and you can also check out Overcoming Graduation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So thank you guys all for listening. Thanks for being with us here today. And go out and see if you got some money on unclaimed.org, and definitely check out PeteSendMeFreeStuff.com, because you can see how much value Peter delivered to you in this slightly over hour interview today. Just imagine if you really immerse yourself into his content, what you'll be getting from it, because God knows I will be immersing myself even more, especially now that we've gotten a chance to talk and dive in. So, Pete, thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.